Hey guys, Mr. Terrell here with your e-learning assignment for April the 15th. We're going to shift focus a little bit away from taxes and we're going to talk more about the different types of business structures that exist. So we're going to talk about several different types of business structures. Today we're going to focus on sole proprietorships. We're also, though, going to talk about partnerships, LLCs, and corporations. So there's several different ways in which you can structure your company, and depending on the level of liability that you're willing to take on, depending on if you take on any partners or investors, really you could make an argument for all of these different types of corporate structures or company structures. And you will find farms that utilize virtually all of these types of structures. And depending on what your situation is, it makes sense to utilize any number of these systems. So today we're going to focus mostly on sole proprietorship stuff. So our objectives, we're going to describe the characteristics of a sole proprietorship. We're going to list the advantages of a sole proprietorship, but also the disadvantages of a sole proprietorship. So a sole proprietorship is a business entity with a single owner slash operator. So by business entity, we mean a professional organization offering something that has real existence. So any type of business that is selling any good or service is considered a business entity. So basically, with a sole proprietorship, there's one owner. Okay, there's one person that owns the company, and they don't really share any responsibility with anyone. It is all them. Okay, so one person running a company that produces a good or offers a service. It's the oldest, most common, and the simplest form of business organization. So it really is as straightforward as it gets. We look at things from an agricultural perspective. If you have one individual that owns and operates their own farm, that is a sole proprietorship, assuming that they don't have any partners. And it is just one person that owns the entire farm, that is a sole proprietorship. And as you look back over history, sole proprietorships have been the most common type of business. And the reason why they're the most common is because they're the most simple. One person owning the entire business is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You take on all of the risk, but you also get, full claim to any profits that come from that business. So one person can serve as the business decision maker. If you're a sole proprietorship, you don't have to worry about consulting a board of directors or consulting your partners or your investors. If you decide you want to do something, then assuming you have the resources to do it, you are free to do so. So you get a ton of freedom in a sole proprietorship. No registration with the state is required. So, in terms of government restriction, a sole proprietorship is about as free as you can be from government restriction. Certainly there's certain aspects of your business that you have to disclose to the government, such as your income and your tax information. But in terms of registering your company with the state, you do not have to do so. If you had a corporation or an LLC, that would be necessary. You would have to register your company information with the state, and you would be subject to state inspection or intervention. But with a sole proprietorship, it is very simple to set up, and there's no state government registration necessary. They're easy to set up and easy to maintain. It's as simple as, deciding you want to start a business. Uh, the owner is personally responsible for the assets, the income taxes, as well as the debts. So you take on a lot of responsibility with a sole proprietorship. Pretty simple to manage and control. Like I said earlier, not a whole lot of red tape that you have to go through. If it is your company and you are the sole proprietor, it is very easy and you have a whole lot of versatility to manage your company. You can do whatever you see fit. You can manage your company however you think is best with virtually little to no, um, intervention from outside entities. You get to call the shots. So some of the advantages, we've already talked about a lot of these things. The first is the owner is his or her own boss. If you own a sole proprietorship, you answer to no one other than yourself. You get the freedom and flexibility that comes with that as well. You get to determine your own work hours. You get to make the management decisions. If you're a sole proprietorship farming operation, you get to choose what to plant and when to plant it. You get to choose when to make capital purchases, when to buy a new tractor or a new combine or build a new grain bin, maybe buy a new farm. You get to choose when you start work and when you finish work. You get the freedom that comes with that. And that's one of the main draws of a sole proprietorship. People like to be their own boss. That is one of the main advantages of it. There's no legal formalities involved in forming or dissolving the business. You can start the business or you can stop the business anytime you want, anytime you see fit, with little to no government intervention. Now, obviously, if you're committing crimes such as fraud or something like that, then the government's going to get involved. But as long as you're operating legally within the restraints of the law, you're not going to really have to deal with too much government meddling in your affairs. And that's another big advantage of a sole proprietorship. Another advantage is that the money that the business makes belongs to the owner. Okay, you get all the profits. Now, you might have to pay your employees, you're going to have to pay your overhead costs, your bills, and things like that. But any money that's left over, any profit that's left over, you are entitled to. You don't have to share any of your profits with any investors or any partners, any shareholders, any things like that. Another advantage is that you have the ability to make quick decisions. If you own a farm and you wake up one morning and decide, what, the weather looks great outside. I wasn't planning on going and starting to plant corn until next week, but the weather forecast looks favorable. The conditions are good today. The planter's ready. The seed's sitting there in the barn. Let's go. Let's go plant corn today. You don't have to consult with a board of directors or a partner and get bogged down in that type of stuff. You can make decisions. If you decide you want to do something, you can do so. Let's say that the corn market rallies one day, and you look and see that basis is rather strong at your local elevator, and you had 20,000 bushels of corn that you were going to wait and sell in a couple months, but prices look good right now. You get to say, what, let's load up the truck and go sell some corn because I'm going to make that decision and I can do so very, very quickly. That's one of the great things with the sole proprietorship. Your startup costs may be minimal. You can limit your startup costs a lot more because you're the only one making the decision. You don't have to appease a shareholder that maybe wants to, or a partner that wants to invest in new capital or wants to spend a bunch of money on upgrades to facilities. You can keep your startup costs as low as you want them to be. It's very, very cheap as well. And due to the fact that you really don't have to register much with the government, that saves you a lot in legal fees, saves you a lot in permit costs and things like that. So if you fit certain criteria, a sole proprietorship is for you. It's a great type of organization for a business that is small and will remain small, that does not have a great exposure to liability. So if you don't have a ton of debt, it's a great fit, and it's great for an organization that does not justify the expenses of incorporating and ongoing corporate formalities. So if you plan to stay small, you don't have any intention of really growing, you don't have a ton of debt on your books, a sole proprietorship is a great way to go. Now, there are companies that started off as sole proprietorships that eventually, grew out of that. One that pops into my head is John Deere, right? If we look at the roots of John Deere, okay, back in the 1800s, John Deere started off as a sole proprietor and he manufactured plows. And he made and manufactured plows for many years. People bought those plows. His company began to grow. And eventually, John Deere grew from a sole proprietorship into a global corporation that is the dominant figure in the manufacturing and sales of farm equipment. So oftentimes the large scale corporations that you see today got their start as a sole proprietorship. They just simply grew out of that type of organization and transition into another type. And there's nothing that says you can't do that. So some of the disadvantages of a sole proprietorship. It can be difficult to raise capital. You know, you have to provide or be able to provide the capital up front to start the business, the money that is needed to start the business. Now, maybe you get that through some sort of a loan. Well, that's fine, but you are liable for that loan. And if the business doesn't do well enough to generate enough income to help you pay back that loan, you are the one that's liable for that. So, getting capital raised is difficult because you can't rely on investors, you can't rely on shareholders to generate that income for that capital to start. Banks are less willing to lend money to one person for a business venture. Banks view an owner of a sole proprietorship as a fairly big liability. And the reason why they view them that way is because there's only one person to go after. And if you default on that loan, it's not like they can go pursue three or four, other partners or shareholders to recoup those funds. You're the only person that's liable. And if they're unable to get their money out of you, they could potentially take a loss on you. So banks are very wary of loaning money to a sole proprietor. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't do it. They certainly will, but they're going to require very, very good credit, a good credit history, and they also might require some sort of collateral because they're taking you on as something that they view as a pretty big risk. You're probably going to be, prone to higher interest rates just because if a bank views you as a higher risk for lending, they're going to charge you more interest as a result. Another disadvantage is that the owner has unlimited liability. So if you borrow money, okay, to start a sole proprietorship business, both the business and personal assets of the proprietor are subject to the claims of the creditors. So let's say that you borrow money to start a sole proprietorship and you default on your loan. The bank is not only able to seize the assets associated with your business, they can't just take your tractors and your barns and your facilities. They can come after your personal property. They can seize your personal pickup truck. They can seize your personal home, okay, your boat that you take to the lake on the weekends. Okay, so you take on a ton of liability when you uh, enter into a sole proprietorship. You take on all the liability of the company because there's no one else to share that with. And another disadvantage is that if the business ends, or if the owner dies, the business ends. And that's why a lot of times sole proprietorships will, transition into partnerships. Let's say an owner, has a son or daughter and they wish to pass that business to that son or daughter. They may have started off as a sole proprietorship, but once that uh, son or daughter comes of age, they might transition the company into a partnership with that son or daughter so that when the original owner dies, it's easier to transition that company over to the next generation. So the owner of a sole proprietorship is responsible for the entire business. They're responsible for their own health insurance, which can be very, very expensive. Talk to any farmer and ask them about their health insurance. It is incredibly expensive to get health insurance if you don't work for a larger company. The owner is responsible for paying all their own income taxes as well. The sole proprietor must also pay self-employment tax, which includes their contributions to Social Security and Medicare. Okay, so you have to pay your own Medicare costs. Normally if you worked for a company, the company would withhold those things from your check. But if you're a sole proprietor, no one writes you a check every week, and no one withholds those taxes for you. So you have to make sure that you are paying your fair share into Social Security and Medicare, that FICA tax. Okay, so that concludes our discussion on sole proprietorships. There is an assignment on Canvas that I want you to complete. Um, if you have any questions, feel free to email me and let me know. Tomorrow we will get into partnerships. Partnerships, okay? All right, guys, thank you and have a great day.